space, making sure everything works before we have everyone join in. Hey, Drew. I'm going to invite you.
Monsi, how are you?
Good. How's it going?
Great.
Yeah. Everything seems to be working fine so far. I haven't tweeted this out yet. But people have been joining in and jumping out because I think they can still see the space live. But we can wait for everyone to join in the next few minutes just to test out everyone's audio and everything's working great. And then excited for today's conversation.
Yeah, me too. If everyone can see it, should we wait until a little closer to 6 to set it up?
Yeah, we could do that. Let me end this and then maybe 5 minutes before 6 we can jump back on. I know David wanted to test out his mic and audio setting wasn't all set, so maybe he needs a couple more minutes, but I think, yeah, closer to 6 sounds good and we can jump back on then.
That sounds great.
All right. See you, everyone. Oh, we have Greg here. Maybe not. Maybe we stick around. Greg, can you request access? Yes. Hey, how's it going? Oh, his audio.
Sorry, I'm now live. Hey, how are you?
Good, good. Drew and I were just talking if you want to make this space live already because people can. There's no testing phase per se. You just go live. But yeah, for whoever is listening, thank you for joining. We are going to be just playing around and testing with the space for a couple minutes, and then around 6 is when we'll actually start the conversation. Have you done this before, Greg?
Yeah, several of these
Nice.
impromptu ones too.
Those are the best.
Yeah, my favorites are one I do at like 1 a.m. in the night. I'm about to hit the bed, see a space. I join as a listener. They bring me up as a speaker. I'm like, fuck.
Yeah, those are great. I love overall in love with Twitter Spaces. Just it's a great way to connect with people.
Yeah, I like this better than the other one, the Clubhouse. I barely use Clubhouse anymore. Because I don't have the network network there, and I think network speaks volumes.
100%. I mean, from a product perspective, I don't want to comment, but from just like bootstrapping the network and bringing kind of the existing community together, I think Twitter Spaces and Twitter just in general is kind of hard to beat for Clubhouse. All right, I'm waiting for David and Dioshan to join. Hey everyone, if anyone in the meantime, as we are testing the space, wants to jump on stage and chat with us, feel free to do that.
Greg, you're based in SF.
Yes, I am in SF, and today I'm in the office. Like we have a shared office. I'm sitting with my coworkers, and we actually had lunch together for the first time in like a million years. So
That's great. I think it's one of the only two places in the whole U.S. that isn't sizzling right now.
yeah,
Really
Really
jealous.
hot. We have Dan and Rodney who wanted to say hi. Welcome to Twitter Spaces. And like I said, we're still another 10 minutes of like testing. So if you have anything you want to add, feel free.
I just like to say I'm really excited for this. This is a really cool topic that I'm really interested in. I see like a huge opportunity for the centralized web, so I'm an enthusiast.
Awesome. Great to hear that. And hopefully we'll be doing more of these convos. And like Greg was mentioning, ad hoc too. Those are great. Just like get everyone together and start chatting, geeking. Dan, are you still in Boston?
No, I'm down in Puerto Rico now. I'm actually on the beach at the moment, so I can't.
Jealous. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, but I will be in Boston in August, and one of the hardest parts of leaving was I do Big Brothers Big Sisters, so my little brother is there, so I'm excited to be able to hang out with him in August.
That sounds fun. Puerto Rico definitely sounds fun. And the beach. I can hear the beach in the background. So I got a message from David and he said he's here, but I'm not seeing him. Is anyone else?
I think it's Christian.
I don't see him here in the listeners.
Hmm. Sorry, I'm gonna just troubleshoot this and I'll be back. And by I'll be back, I mean I'm just gonna be on mute for a few. I see Namebase is here. Is Tioshin here? Or is he speaking? Is he gonna be speaking through Namebase? Thank you, everyone, for joining, and thank you for your patience. We are still waiting for two speakers to join us today before we can kick off the session on Unstoppable dWeb Stack. Hopefully, we can still kick this off at 6, but for now, if anyone is interested in jumping on stage and just saying hi, feel free to request access. Or, yeah, the emojis work really well. That's another thing I like about Twitter Spaces. I'm not sure, Greg, have you seen that on Clubhouse?
No, I don't think they have that. You
It
definitely
doesn't.
have. Yeah, I like the reaction emojis. Let's see.
My biggest issue with the reaction emojis is we need like 100 more. It doesn't convey all my emotions I want to share.
100% agreed. Okay, great. We have Theoshin here. Hey, Theoshin, can you hear us? Is your audio working fine? All good?
Yeah, perfect. Can you hear me?
It's a little low, but yeah, we can hear you
What about now?
better.
Okay, cool.
All right, and I see David joined us. So hopefully we can bring him on stage as well and get started in a few. Thank you, Dan, for jumping on stage. And we will be happy to bring you back in a bit. David, are you seeing a request to jump on stage? All right, we have quorum. David, can you hear us? Is your audio working great?
Yeah, I can hear you guys. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Made it. Still gonna give a couple of minutes for people to trickle in. But where is everyone calling in from? I know, Greg, you mentioned you are in SF.
At the Ferry Building, SF Heart, downtown. Feels good. Definitely feels good to work in an office again.
Nice, nice. How big is the Akash team now?
About 22 people. I think we're adding 4 more people hopefully soon this month.
Exciting. And is everyone based out of Bay Area SF or?
The leadership team, for the most part, is based in the Bay, and some of us are. Our second biggest location is LA after Bay, and rest of the country. We did, however, hire our first international person in India, so I think we'll be looking at more international as well. We don't, yeah, but predominantly it's US, and out of that, Bay and LA.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, with remote work, I assume like sourcing talent can be from anywhere, which is great. I love that part of
Yeah,
being remote.
being a crypto, we are remote first, right, to begin with.
Yeah,
So the pandemic was just accelerated our ability to hire, I believe, because a lot of people are taking remote first as a norm. And I think now remote first is a perk more than a thing now, right? Like there's so much. I keep hearing there's so much talent that opened up across the country. Now a lot of them are being forced to go back to the offices, which is not gonna. It's not sitting well. So I'm looking at record level like job changes, like in middle of Ohio or something. My sister is a manager at one of the big companies, and she was like, "Wow, any company that's asking people to come back to the office, there's another company that's offering remote work as a perk. So I'm hopeful for the future.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard the same. And then Tirsin, where are you calling in from?
Right now, calling in from the East Coast.
Oh, nice. So you're in the same time zone as us.
Yeah.
And David, I know you are traveling right now.
That's correct. I'm on the move. Family vacation in Colorado this week. I see two of myself in the app. Am I coming through twice, or is the audio good?
Audio's good, and I only see one of you.
All right, maybe it's just my my app screwing up.
All good, all good. Drew, do we want to give a couple more minutes, or how are you feeling? Do we want to
What?
kick this off?
Yeah, we have everyone. Why don't we dive in?
Awesome. Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name's Mansi Vora. I'm the VP of Strategy and Operations at Skynet Labs. I've done a couple of these Twitter spaces in the past. They've been really fun, wide variety of topics, but super excited about today's conversation because it definitely am biased. It includes one of the projects that I work on, Skynet. But also excited because Drew here, who's been an amazing mentor, advisor, is joining me as a co-host. Drew, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm a founding partner at a venture fund called First Star Ventures. I was a CTO for a long time in a number of startups around distributed systems and machine learning, and then switched over to the venture side 5 or 6 years ago to focus on new kinds of computation, including decentralization. We were one of the seed investors in SHA and have done a bunch of interesting computational companies since.
Great. Thank you, Drew, for co-hosting this. And then do we want to just go around all the speakers? Would love to hear an intro about you. And then also a little bit more about the project you represent. And I'm sure there are people here from each community that would love to hear from you all about different things that you're working on. So let's start with a quick intro.
My name is Greg Osuri. I'm the founder of Akash Network. Akash is the it's a censorship-resistant, permissionless, and a self-sovereign network, and the backbone of which relies on a cluster of computers spread across the globe that are offering the services in a permissionless way at a price point that's driven by the market. So usually, currently, the price point is around 1/3 lower than the big CSP. So it's a open cloud and very pro market cloud. So
Great. Tiashin, do you want to go next?
Yeah, Tiashan run a company called Namebase. We basically built a domain registrar for Handshake, which is the protocol that we've built on top of. And Handshake specifically is a decentralized DNS protocol. So, whenever you visit a website like twitter.com, for example, the twitter.com part is the domain name. That's part of the domain name system, or abbreviated DNS. And right now, that system basically works under a legacy centralized infrastructure, and Handshake changes the architecture to put DNS on a blockchain. And it's a protocol that interops very well with Akash and Skynet, which is why we're all talking here today. And then Namebase basically just makes Handshake easy to use for normal people.
I love how you define Nameshake, just making Handshake available for normal people. David, you're up.
Yeah, I'm the CEO of Skynet Labs, and we're really the like thesis of Skynet is around the question like what would happen if web applications were designed such that users own the data instead of corporations. And so like right now the internet is broken up into a whole bunch of data silos where like Google and YouTube and that umbrella owns one stack of data, and then you have like the Facebook, Instagram stack of data, and you have like the Amazon, Twitch stack of data. And the data is not really allowed to escape. You used to have, like 10 years ago, all these APIs on top of things like Twitter and on top of Facebook that startups would use, and built very interesting, exciting products around this data APIs. But as companies kind of matured, they realized it's more profitable to shut those down and keep everything to themselves. So we're asking the question, like if users own the data and if those APIs were permanently locked open, what would the internet look like? And I think that's really the driving mission of the company is we want to crack the internet back open and create a space where all of this useful like information can be used to build into all of humanity instead of into these captured silos, corporation captured silos.
Yeah, and I think I have tagged this tweet that really resonated with me. And this is again a new feature in Twitter Spaces. So if any of the speakers or anyone wants to highlight a tweet or a resource, feel free to attach it to the space. But what Gigamesh said, I love it. Web 1 made us consumers, Web 2 made us creators, and Web 3 or the dWeb is all about making us owners. And that can be owners of our finances, or owners of our data, or owners of just everything that we do on the internet. And which is what today's topic is about, dWeb. Love to hear from Drew how you define the dWeb space.
So I think that's a hard one because I think there's a bunch of different definitions depending who you ask, and I think it's a brand new space. As David said, I think a lot of it's about a natural centralization decentralization process. 20 years ago when you hopped on the internet, it was a very decentralized place. We used protocols like IRC and Usenet, and in general apps and tools that were very decentralized. There were thousands and thousands of email servers, lots of IRC servers, and it was a very federated, decentralized place, which was also made it healthier. In the decade and a half since, things have become more centralized, and I think by using blockchain technologies, we can start to tease out and as David said, I think starting with an interesting question of if users controlled and owned their data and experiences, what would applications really look like? And I guess maybe to throw it over to Greg, maybe you could talk a little about your vision for the decentralized web and kind of how you got into this, because I know you've had a long career in enterprise software.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you both, all three of you answered pretty well. I mean, it's really about bringing ownership back to the people. If you think about cloud or compute being the core fabric for the society, the risk of these silos. I mean, effectively, what 4 or 5 companies control 80 to 90% of market share in the cloud today, and that results in structural problems. And oligopolization always results in structural problems. And right now, at a broad level, I would define these problems as privacy, productivity, and price, right? So for us, really bringing that control back to the users, to the owner, and taking a market-first approach, and what that results in just better tooling, right? So for us, when we began Akash, it was we identified, we thought this whole Amazon play is so structurally, against everything we stand as open source people, open source developers, and if you don't do something about it, this is going to be a problem that's going to get rampant, right? So when we designed Akash, we really began as open source developers, as someone that loves open systems. How do you go about designing marketplaces, right? I think now we have the tools and technologies, and back then was still very hazy, like how you would go about designing one. Unfortunately, a blockchain as a core data primitive helps us design the self-sovereign systems. Yeah. So the way I look at dWeb is decentralization at every level of the stack. As you're seeing with Akash, decentralizing compute not trying to do everything, but this just the compute. SIA, Skynet, doing that for storage, and Handshake doing that for DNS. And then now we have other platforms that need recognition, like LivePeer doing that for video encoding, and NewCipher doing that for key management system. I think every stack of an application deployment is now being decentralized. And the way I look at it is now it's about bringing them together. And I'm so glad that we're having this conversation here. I'm so glad to see the organic federation coming together, like what we saw in the IRC times, right? So, and hopefully we will not make the same mistakes that the last decade did, and hopefully figure out a way to keep systems open and not become the middleman and the source of the problem.
Yeah, but at the same time, Greg and David and Tiashan, feel free to chime in. I think there are some trade-offs with the way Web 2 is moving away from Web 3. A lot of benefits, but also that comes with a lot of user friction, in the sense that now you have to understand new technology. You have to, in some cases, download the blockchain, deal with cryptocurrencies. How do you see us bridging that gap of, there are amazing projects being built in this space, to actually end users being able to use these projects?
So if you look at historically, let's keep it in crypto itself, right? Like, obviously the problem happens to be user experience, and Web3 or dWeb, doesn't quite match the user experience Web 2 provides, and it's very similar to the IRC days where your client is different, your servers are different, all these things that you need to put together in order to get functional, right? Now, the obvious solution is to solve the problem, but I can't really pinpoint how that problem is getting solved, and we're all trying different things. But what's obvious is when a problem gets solved, it is probably when the user experience gets solved, it's probably the best user experience that you can get. Like, a fair example would be just using Uniswap versus using something like Binance, right? Just to swap assets, the number of steps you need to do on Binance: sign up, verification, you capture problems, double verification, triple verification. By the time you can swap two assets, you're going to go through probably 20 to 25 steps, right? Versus doing something in doing a swap in Uniswap, it's about 3 steps, right? That gives me a lot of hope when it comes to user experiences. Can actually be much better than your centralized or Web 2 user experiences if done right. So I have a lot of hope in terms of like how we can think about the problem in a way that doesn't have the baggage that Web 2 has, and probably deliver superior results, right? So we're kind of getting there. We're putting the pieces now, the foundational elements, and the foundational elements are actually working. And now the next thing is like, how do we bring those elements together in a frictionless, in a much superior user experience than Web 2 can offer? Like, if you go to Amazon and try to deploy websites, there are probably like 36 ways to deploy a container on Amazon, right? Like, sure, all these have evolved over time, but the old stuff remains old, right? So, and now I see an opportunity for us to really rethink how do we design composability and how do we design federation as a whole, and that's much better than the old. So, I'm very hopeful that this user experience friction will get solved, and it's only time.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think we're very early on the technology, and that I love the Uniswap example, but I think also just in the distributed web, we're now seeing things that allow, MetaMask is one. Skynet has a solution called MySky that allows people to have like a single account, and it's all seed based. We have the fundamentals to get rid of the idea of signing in with a user and password, or even signing in at all. Like it just you have your web browser, and then when you go to a website, you're automatically logged in and you're automatically using all of your own stuff. So I think one of the approaches that we've been using at SIA is just to build the most. Did I get kicked?
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry. My app is messing up. I got like an invitation to be a speaker, but that's okay. So, yeah, I think that when you look at the fundamental, like how powerful is this technology compared to how powerful is centralized technology, early on in dWeb, up to like maybe even 2018, 2019, the answer seemed to be we don't know. It doesn't look like dWeb is more powerful than the centralized web, and so for that like duration, I wasn't confident that dWeb would be able to take over. But in the past 2 years, between Akash, between Skynet, between Handshake, and all these other just innovations that have come like flowing forward, it's been like we turned a corner and the floodgates opened, and now it just feels like there's so much more technological efficiency and technological power behind what we're building. It seems to me like completely inevitable that we will eradicate the centralized web because we're going to run circles around them with open data paradigms and with open container paradigms, and so I think it's just going to take time to figure out those user experience hooks and how to soften all the edges. But from a perspective of power, it really feels like there's a lot more here than we've ever had before, and that's going to give us what we need to bulldoze through the centralized web.
Yeah, and to that point, another amazing data point to notice is like a lot of the projects right now are hyper focused on user adoption, right? I mean, I think we're finally done with the 2008 ICO. I think Internet Computer is the last one, hopefully. But after that, we're really like any serious project in the space right now is focused on user experience, and I like that focus. That's the kind of focus that's going to get us over the hedge.
Yeah. I think, David, yes, your app is messing up because I see you toggling between a speaker and a listener, but I think you're good for now. And I think, Greg and David, you both alluded to this fact of, composability and how the last few years have been about building a strong foundation. And now we are starting to see different parts of the stack coming together. And that's basically, the focus of today's conversation is building this unstoppable dWeb stack. And for those who haven't guessed what SHA is, it's Skynet, Handshake, and Akash. So would love to hear, maybe we can kick it off with Tiashin about how do you see these three technologies working together?
Yeah, I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. I remember even just like a few months ago speaking with David about composing all these technologies together, and to the question of the progress of the web in this space, it's like that was literally when just like a few months ago when I realized like, oh, these technologies can be composed together in a very powerful way to actually create fully decentralized alternatives to sites like Reddit or Facebook, but that are more permissionless and composable. And so I'm someone where I'm like working in this literally every day, and it wasn't even until just the last 2 months that I really saw the potential to put everything together. So I think that we're still so early, but it's reflecting what Greg and David were saying. It's really coming together in a super powerful way. I'm really excited to see what people start to build using all these technologies together. In terms of your question, Manasi, would it be helpful? I can go pretty into the weeds in terms of certain types of applications and certain architectures. Would that be useful, or do you think it would be more useful to keep it high level? I'm just curious what you sense is the right
Yeah,
direction.
let's dig in a little. Maybe not super technical, but yeah, let's talk tangible use cases.
Yeah, I think one really clear use case that I see, and I don't think that this will necessarily be the best use case, but I think what we'll see is like, the first use cases we'll see like analogs to the Web 2 technologies, just because that's going to be what people understand and relate to. And then once people start using those Web 2 analogs, then that's when there will be potential to build, some more creative things. That's kind of like what we're seeing in DeFi too, right? The first one was some loaning stuff and some decentralized exchanges like Uniswap, and then now we're seeing even more powerful applications. So I think one early application that I could totally see built on Akash and Skynet and Handshake is you have a website like a decentralized Reddit or like a decentralized Twitter, where you have the data stored on Skynet, right? So like the raw posts can be stored on Skynet, and you can even have things like followers and block lists and whatnot. And then you have the usernames stored on Handshake, because Handshake is, for a very specific purpose. It's just decentralized naming, and it allows you to associate, specific metadata with a username. Like I have Tieshan, right? That's why my username is Tieshan / on Twitter, because I have that name on Handshake, and I can associate data, associate my public keys with that. I can even associate a Skynet bucket. And using this architecture, you can now have, usernames posting data to their feeds. And then on the reader end, you want to pull this all together into a single client, right? And then that's where something like Akash can come in, where you basically, what you have is, if you have the data on Skynet and the usernames on Handshake, you want to have a very convenient explorer for that feed, these feeds, and put them all together. So you want to have something like a block explorer, but for this decentralized Twitter alternative, right, where you're using Skynet for the data backbone. And you want to pre-compute a lot of the posts so that, not everyone needs to go and store the entire Skynet, SHA blockchain or Handshake blockchain on their computer. So you'll have these centralized front ends that are like block explorers that will allow anyone to go and just view the feeds of this decentralized Twitter through a normal website. And if you want to make those block explorers, those decentralized Twitter explorers really easy to use, you would use Akash to do the pre-computations, and then you can throw up a normal website using that. And now you have essentially a decentralized Twitter. And the really cool thing about this is that a normal user who doesn't know anything about the dWeb and just wants to, access the application, they can go to this block explorer effectively and just go and, view the feed. But every bit of this will basically be decentralized, so that if someone wants to build another competing block explorer, or they want to, add a twist to it, right? Maybe they want to throw in some additional functionality onto this decentralized Twitter, they can, because all of the users and their data are public on these public blockchain networks. And then they can easily go and, fork the client and create their own client. And the users don't have any lock-in, because their data isn't being stored in some centralized Twitter database. It's now being stored on an open blockchain, and their usernames as well are stored on an open blockchain. And so they can very easily port over to other clients or use other applications that want to build on top. So that's just one example of a decentralized application built with the SHA stack.
Love it. Thank you for walking us through that. David, Greg, anything you want to add?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to go first?
Okay.
Yeah. So I've actually, especially over the past month, been getting a lot more excited about these much smaller little points of decentralization that we can insert. So like one thing that I think we've been working on with Akash is just the ability to, so I'll step back a little bit. Like Akash does this great thing where you can spin up any container and put it on a server. But then if something goes wrong in that container, you lose all your data. And you can combine Akash with Skynet to, say, make regular encrypted backups of your MongoDB database, so that if the one provider you're on fails, you just switch to a new provider. The server like re-downloads itself, like resets, and within an hour or two, you're completely ready to go again. And so you can create these fleets that, even if Akash ends up being not as robust as Amazon on a per server basis, you can create applications running off of Akash that are fully robust. And so this is like one example of a place that Skynet is really enhancing the capabilities. And then I'm going to give one more example of another thing that we just kind of realized in the past couple of weeks is that you can add Skynet as a decentralized CDN to any centralized website. And so this really magnifies the power of something like an Imgur competitor to distribute content to users because they no longer need these enormous connections. Skynet can handle that for them, and they can fall back on this like user-funded paradigm for powering their application. You don't need to be a $5 million startup to make a video app. Skynet can kind of handle that all for you now. So those are kind of things that have been really been jazzing me lately.
Just to highlight a key point there, and also in something Tayshaun said, there's a question of will Web3 eventually centralize as these networks mature? And I think I have a lot of hope that they stay decentralized for two of the reasons you guys highlighted. One, as you mentioned, David, the cool thing about all this infrastructure is because it's designed, basically it's designed from the ground up to be used by software, it has a very low entry point. So if you want to start a new video streaming service, it's not easy to go talk to Akamai or Cloudflare and like get a contract to distribute all of those videos. But it's super easy to set up a server and start using Skynet to do it. Similarly, Tayshaun's point about, today most people's data is all locked in LinkedIn or Facebook or, choose your favorite social network. If I want to take my friends graph and move it out of Facebook, Facebook makes that really, really hard to do. But as we sign up for new services, if they are decentralized, as a user, that gives you a lot more power. But it also means there's a great market force where over time, if anyone becomes too dictatorial or too aggressive with users, there's a natural out, which is new services can spring up and use your social graph to create new services. And so I just want to highlight, for me, that's why I'm optimistic, why we may have a long run of things being decentralized.
I mean, yeah, total agreement. Like with all you. I mean, like David and Tashan put it very well. Now, at a high level, the way you want to summarize these projects, the way they work is like, well, DNS is discovery, right? Handshake does discovery really well. Akash is the middleware, and Skynet is a storage solution, the backend, right? Not the backend, the storage, right? Backends gets a little complicated. They fit so well together. We are seeing amazing businesses now being built using these three stacks. So one example I saw that blew my mind, I was about to send it to you, David. It's in our forum. Someone built a open version of Docker Hub. As you know, Docker Hub is where it's a registry for your Docker containers. It's centralized. It's hosted by Docker. It's not evolving as much because Docker is pretty much winding down, I believe. But we love the service, and we really want the service to exist and evolve and like update and whatnot. So I saw a demo where they were actually storing the container images on Skynet and using Akash as a touch point to access this. And of course, this on Handshake as well. So you can get like these namespaces with a Handshake namespace for a Docker container. Now, this is a very unique like use case that, yeah, databases and all that is great, but I like to see these kind of systems. These are the kind of things that I never imagined would exist a while back, because purely open systems for currently closed systems to exist, and the SHA stack providing that foundation is very exciting. Yeah, on that point, like David, like Akash, our whole thesis about is you may or may not get a powerful server because it's open marketplace and you can expect a wide diverse set of servers out there, right? In a scenario like that, what you want to really design is a resiliency model that's based on redundancy, right? So the Skynet, the platform provides us this deterministic model where it doesn't matter what server you use, you still can get back and bootstrap the data because that's stored permanently on Skynet. And now we have all kinds of freedom in terms of how you want to experiment with your deployments, right? So you can do like low latency deployments or high latency. It doesn't really matter. You can have this wide variety of like options for cluster design on Akash. And when you put a handshake domain on top of that, it essentially, skips the entire internet. And I see DVPN here, Sentinel. What I really like about them, and they're resolving, handshake names automatically. Now, imagine a world where I have VPN running on Sentinel, and my DNS is all automatically resolved. I don't have to make any name server changes locally, and I'm using using Handshake without even knowing I'm using Handshake. And that Handshake is probably routing to an Akash server, and that's unstoppable. And we've seen quite a bit like use cases in like the deplatforming risk to be deplatformed, users, and as you know, deplatforming is rampant. So we're seeing quite a bit of usage there currently in Akash, and I assume a lot of them are using Handshake as well. So, so pretty excited to actually solving real problems people have right now using these three platforms. And there's even someone like I don't know. There was a guide going on about like how to use like WordPress on Akash and Skynet and Handshake, and someone sent a proposal that he's like one of the top like WordPress contributors, like one of the top 15 or something, and they're like going to build an entire business on top of the stack, and the value proposition is uncensorable WordPress, which I think 33% of the entire globe runs on WordPress if you think about it. So it's just the impact of uncensorable WordPress is just beyond anything we can imagine. I think use cases like this are popping up on a daily basis. I'm really excited where we're going.
I wanted to step back a little bit to a point that Drew made earlier, which is he talked about kind of locking things open and migrating data from Facebook to somewhere else. And I think that actually what the dWeb enables is so much more powerful, because we've never had a situation before where multiple companies and multiple web apps could be built at the same time using the same pool of data. Like even back in 2005, when there were a lot more, maybe 2010, when there were a lot more APIs and the silos were a lot more open, they were still silos. It was still, you had Facebook's data, and then Facebook let you access it. But on the dWeb, you can actually make this pile of data just completely open, completely independent of Facebook, and you could have a Facebook and a MySpace and a Nextdoor and like 7 or 8 completely different social media platforms, all building on top of the exact same social network grid, where when I make a connection on Facebook, that connection is instantly available on every competing application with Facebook for me as the user. And I think that's really where we start to run circles around the centralized web. That's something that Facebook will never be able to keep up with, because everyone with an interesting idea will be able to execute their interesting idea against the entire internet's worth of data. They don't have to bootstrap themselves. We've just overcome the problem where when you launch a platform, you have no users. When you launch a platform in dWeb, on day one, you have access to every single video, every single social connection, every single comment and like. And I think that that's just, it's so empowering for builders, and that's something that 10 years from now is just going to seem completely like the right way to do it. And I think in hindsight, it's going to be a very, very celebrated advancement in the world of the internet.
%. I think the theme around ownership, the theme around breaking these walled gardens, the theme around just like more control is consistent across the crypto blockchain space, but love to see it beyond the financial use cases that we've so far, I think, explored in the space. On the flip side, though, there are some myths around what happens when individuals have full control. What happens when there is controversial material that gets put online through one of these platforms? What happens when I guess like the broader question here is how, in a decentralized world, can we still have some modicum of moderation, not just for content, but also for the community?
Yeah, so I think a very common mistake that people make is associating decentralization with like a lack of moderation. And so when we say that the dWeb is uncensorable, what we mean is that communities themselves cannot be stopped. And so if a community wants to exist, it's allowed to exist. But within that community, people have complete control over how they want to operate. For example, if you're running a WordPress site on Akash and it's unstoppable WordPress, and then someone's just putting spam, selling pills or whatever in your WordPress blog, you have the complete power to go ahead and delete that spam and ban those users and make it so that they can't use they can't use your platform as an advertising vehicle. And so switching to the unstoppable web does not mean that we are suddenly vulnerable to spam and advertising and unwanted content. What it means is that instead of having this like the way we operate now is that you have communities where the communities are kind of in control, but then they have overlords that really, like Discord, whether it's Discord or YouTube or Twitch or WordPress or Amazon, it's like they decide ultimate baseline for rules that the community has to follow. And this is something I know Discord definitely struggles with. And when you switch to the unstoppable web, you still have all of that moderation within the community. You just drop the overlord, and so you can still ban people from communities. And I think a lot of people miss that point, and they think that it's this free for all, which it's definitely not. The big thing is that we drop the overlords.
I agree. I mean, free speech doesn't give you the right to yell fire in a theater, right? It really, the community should moderate. And to that point, to be a little more specific as to how we look at, I mean, I agree with, David's absolute, like giving free speech doesn't mean you should moderate, right? I mean, a platform that has free speech as a core driver should absolutely have strong moderation. One of the things in Akash is, well, as long as the community allows a website to exist, it will exist. What that means is, say you're hosting with a provider, and for some reason you're doing something really crazy, something really bad, right? And the provider has a right and the power to choose to host you or not. So as long as there's one provider that chooses to host you, you will exist, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. And so if you're doing something really bad and really like harmful, we imagine humanity will step up and there will not be any providers that'll host you, right? But if you're hosting something that is that there is a group of people that agree with you, they should be able to provide compute, right, to you, and you should absolutely have the right to exist. So it really comes down to community moderation, and having those tools powering community moderation is what we're providing. I mean, we're not explicitly working on moderation tools, but I think it's not easy to it's not hard to imagine that these tools are going to be a lot more accessible and whatnot, right? So yeah, bottom line is like, yeah, moderation is super important for free speech to exist, or else it actually, lack of moderation threatens free speech.
I'm curious, Tiashan, how do you think about this from a decentralized domain naming system within the Handshake and name-based community?
Yeah, I think just stepping back a bit, if you look at how applications are built today, basically it's, the core is centralized. Like if you're using something like Facebook or Twitter, the core is centralized. And then when you shift over to this dWeb architecture, you have the core is decentralized, but you might have points of centralization around the edges, and that's how people typically access them. And this is not just for dWeb, but also if you look at, I mean, DeFi or even just cryptocurrencies in general, right? Like we have Bitcoin, it's very decentralized, but then most people will just go and buy their Bitcoin on Coinbase. And then, you know, even Uniswap is like, oh, okay, it's decentralized, but then most people will just go to uniswap.exchange and access it through that. But the benefit is that people can create their own alternatives to these, you know, centralized outer edges. And if there is an issue with any one of them, you know, people can shift over and still use the decentralized core. But the thing is, for each point of centralized access, that's ultimately where the moderation ends up shifting to. So if you think about, you know, let's say someone gets hacked and all their Bitcoin gets stolen, right? And it's like very high profile. Actually, the Twitter hackings was a good example, right? The Twitter accounts were hacked. Some people posted these like scam posts and were like, send Bitcoin here. A bunch of Bitcoin was sent to those addresses, and then the exchanges basically immediately blacklisted those addresses so that they couldn't go and offload their Bitcoin onto those exchanges. The core was still decentralized, but the access, you know, was mainly through these centralized providers, and those centralized providers would provide the moderation. And I think that that's basically unavoidable, right? Because, and that's also in many ways desirable, because you still want the ability for bad actors to be weeded out. It's just, it might be a little bit harder in some ways. But then also, if you think about that, you know, Bitcoin example, you know, maybe that person could find some random OTC vendor and try to offload their Bitcoin that way. But ultimately, they wouldn't be able to go and offload through the centralized platforms. So I think that with any application built with the SHA stack, it'll be a similar thing. Like I mentioned, maybe like with the decentralized Twitter example, you know, maybe someone starts posting some really nefarious content, and it's on, you know, Skynet, and it's at a Handshake name, and then you know, that content lives there. But the, you know, block explorer like interface that, you know, people are using could go and hide that content, right, and not show it. And if someone was really, really trying, they could still go and access that content if they're, you know, syncing the side blockchain on their own and syncing Handshake on their own, and then going and doing all that. But for most people, the effect would be that, you know, they wouldn't be seeing that in their day-to-day. So I think that's ultimately where we'll end up with how moderation will work. It'll still be a better model than we have today, because ultimately the core will still be decentralized.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to see the tools that get developed as well for the community to self-moderate across these different communities. Drew, I know you wanted to open it up to the audience and have people from the audience jump in for conversations, or do we want to continue with a few more?
Yeah, let's see if folks have questions. If you do, why don't you throw up an emoji, and Mansi can bring you up to be a speaker and ask your question. While we're waiting for that, you know, one question for the group, you know, besides your three projects, what are other projects around the decentralized web you're really excited about?
Like, I mean, to a certain degree, I can put Sentinel as one of the projects, because I know they're a VPN, but VPN has amazing opportunities to build, you know, overlay networks. And I think there's some work to be done, but it's definitely getting there. I really like LivePeer. That, you know, I generally like projects that have growing adoption around a real utility, right, in dWeb. So in that vein, we have LivePeer. They posted a record usage recently. I like, I would say, like even NewCipher. Love to see more, you know, more activity from them. Those are some of the things that I can think top of my head, I think. David?
Yeah, I think So honestly, I think that the dWeb stuff is super early. Of course, there's like a lot of interesting things happening around IPFS. I think that Mirror is a project that's doing a lot of interesting stuff with like tokenization and publishing content, and I think that Audius is also doing a lot of like very interesting dWebby stuff. And I think that a lot of the ideas coming from those projects are very good, and I'm excited to like integrate a lot of those ideas and then try and get that like final leap to full decentralization.
Yeah, I think those two examples fall in the creator economy category, which I don't know if you all saw. Crypto Twitter was, for the lack of better word, shitting on, but not those projects with the creator economy buzz that's going on. Anyway, we have Dan who wanted to speak, and I've brought him up on stage. Hey, Dan.
Hey, Manasi. Thanks so much for having me up. This has been a really interesting talk. I think I'm really passionate about what we're building with the decentralized web. And as Greg mentioned, Sentinel is also a project building decentralized, as far as the decentralized web stack, the bandwidth layer, and a peer-to-peer bandwidth marketplace for DApps to be built on top of, and the most obvious use case is VPN. And we're really excited about that. And I think that also, David, I think, and you're talking about Manasi, the creator economy. I think that's going to be really interesting when some of those opportunities for creators are built on decentralized web, and then creators have unstoppable rights versus if you're on Etsy and you could get cut off from that website, or if you're creating content that's controversial. I think that the creator economy, it'll be interesting. And Audius is a great example. But I guess a question I would have for everyone up here is, what are different form factors we might see these stacks come into play? Are there going to be ways that we could think about, again, a user experience, which will for increasing adoption, different ways that we'll be able to leverage multiple layers of the web stack, the decentralized web stack, so that common users are going to get the benefit without having too much of a challenge implementing each part of the stack?
So one thing I'll throw out there is one reason why I'm really excited about these technologies. It's the first time we've ever had software that can buy stuff. Historically, to buy compute, you have to sign up with AWS, means you have to be a real person. You have to have a credit card. To put something in the Google or Apple App Store, you have to have a DUNS number, and you have to prove that you're a real person with a physical address. What's great about the decentralized web is most of these accounts you create just with a private key, which means a piece of software can create an account and do all sorts of interesting things. And I think that will go a lot of exciting places. You can imagine all sorts of autonomous agents that can create storage for themselves and do all sorts of things. Like, imagine a drone with an economy around it that could have some credits on itself and go charge itself up if it needed to do things. Or even little agents you can create that would be autonomous from any individual human. And I think that on the human side, that also creates a really interesting form factor where you're not having to have a login, not having to think about who you are as a real person, but just being able to use your keys to sign up reduces friction greatly. I know when I buy stuff online with crypto, one of the greatest things about it is not having to give my email address and not having to worry about getting spammed with email or recurring charges a month later. If I give my wallet and pay for something, I know it's a discrete transaction and I'm in control of it.
Yeah, I
very
think
true. As to
for
add to that point, I think very true, right? Like I saw a tweet the other day, someone from Africa who never could use AWS because he didn't have a credit card, and they deployed on Akash for the first time, and they were so happy about just being able to deploy, right? And we forget that remind me, we forget there's a good portion of the world with incredible talent that have no access to the cloud, right? And so I think that's a use case that crypto enables that should be talked about a lot more. And we're so caught up in like cloud and like so Western way of thinking, but we haven't thought about like what about these amazing set of people. And I was once, at one point I grew up in India and I didn't have a credit card growing up. My parents didn't have a credit card growing up. So for me, like to use I mean, there was no cloud back then, but to buy anything online was pretty much prohibitive, right? Like so, um, having that opportunity for someone like me at 13 or someone is something is just an incredible feat of achievement. I think we should celebrate for.
Yeah, one of the reasons that I'm really excited about the creator economy is because it creates these like organic and robust incomes for people who don't have any connection at all to the banking infrastructure. And so, like right now, even even in the decentralized world, like somehow you got to get Akash tokens, or you got to get tokens somehow, and that can be a challenge if you don't have the ability to KYC. But when you start to open up the creator economy, if you make interesting educational YouTube videos and you have a huge audience, like it doesn't, like people don't need to know who you are or where you came from. Like the money can flow to you and can sponsor your stuff, and then you can go and turn around that and use that anywhere else. And so I think the creator economy is kind of what's going to make the jump from this kind of like fringe economic system to something that's just full on. And I think a huge portion of the future economy is going to be entirely powered by the creator economy, and that's going to be untethered from everything in the traditional world. And I think that's from kind of like a CryptoPunk perspective. I think that's a huge step forward that maybe even we're not quite ready for it, but I think it's right around the door. Like 3 years, you're going to see millions of creators making tens of thousands of dollars a year each, producing content.
Yeah, I would agree with that viewpoint. I think even if you look at the like centralized creator economy today, a lot of the power is shifting towards creators. That's why you'll have the biggest ones getting huge, signing bonuses and deals to go and shift over to whatever platform is trying to recruit them over at the time. And if you think about like the dWeb version of that, it'll basically be done. The same thing will happen in the form of uh, like project specific tokens, right? If you're a project and you're trying to recruit a creator over to your project, what I think will end up happening is you'll see projects being like, okay, if these top creators come over to use our client or use our protocol, then they will get 10% of the network, for example. And I think that this will be a very common tactic to use to try to recruit creators over. And ultimately, because the data and the identity will be owned by the creators and not by any of the centralized gateways at the edges, a lot of the market power will move towards creators. So it'll be a great time to be a creator.
Thank you, Dan, for the question. Again, if anyone else wants to join us on the stage and ask questions or just add comments to this discussion, request access. But talking about creator economy, what's kind of I'm asking you all to look into the future. Do we expect to see specific platforms doing very niche content, or do you see a world where different kind of content can flow between platforms? Yeah, like for example, David was talking about with Mirror, we've seen that's specifically targeted towards blogging, and then with Audios, it's music.
Yeah, so I think it's going to come down to the application developer, and it's difficult to kind of project because I think we don't really know how all of these new powers are going to be used. because developers have, and we see this in dWeb all the time. A developer comes in, they have an app idea, and they're thinking entirely in centralized paradigms, and so there are problems that they expect to be solved that they can't solve, and then there are also solutions that they just that are very easy, things that are very easy to do in the dWeb that they just have no concept of. And I think when it comes to kind of mashing applications together and combining something like a music platform and a blogging platform, I don't know if it's clear to me how, like, I definitely think that they will be mashed together, but I have no idea how. And I think that's just because I have a centralized brain. Like, everything I know, every application I've ever used uses a centralized data model, barring the past year. And so it just, I don't have any good ideas for how to mash these things together. But I do think that they will mash together. I do think that there are very interesting and powerful things. And maybe one of the like common threads that's going to come out, I think that dWeb really enables, comes down to curation and almost like information wars. I think today we have this very like sharp disparity between how valuable information is and how valuable people think information is. And so you can do things like I'm going to pull up a brand scam that happened to one of my friends. There's this boot company, and they made super high quality boots and sold them for like $200. Then they got acquired, and so 1 year later, they're making these super low quality boots and still selling them for $200. And what happened was, they took the brand that was well known for making super good $200 boots, and they took out all the quality materials. They made it much cheaper to produce, and they kind of rode on the value of the brand to just scam users. And I think that's just outright a scam, right? You're lying to users, and that's because the users don't realize how important information is. And so we still have this like almost 1950s style trust of brands and companies, and things like Rotten Tomatoes or things like Amazon reviews. We've come to depend on that. And in the centralized web, you don't really have much control over fighting that. I think in the decentralized web, information flows around a lot more easily, and that might be a place where curators start to combine information flows and combine data flows to start to build more robust systems for evaluating like whether or not you should buy boots, or whether or not a video, like an educational video, has accurate content in it. But I do think that whatever happens is going to be very different from what we're used to today, just because the foundation is so alien, and like we don't know how to think about it yet.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, if you look at what happened in DeFi with invention of flash loans, right? That's a very crypto native model that'll only work on deterministic programming systems, right? So, like, I think we're going to have one of the flash loans for dWeb as well, but it's going to take time, like David said, because we had to comprehend open systems, and it's harder than said.
I guess I'm gonna ask again for you all to look into the future. But are there any moonshot ideas or projects that you would be excited to see on the SHA stack?
Decentralized Facebook, easy. I think that is the most valuable thing in humans' recent history is the social graph that Facebook has. I think it's like a marvelous invention, and it's absolutely amazing that Facebook came in and just like ruined all of it and polluted it. And I think that if we rebuild Facebook's social graph on the dWeb, where users own their own connections, that's going to be the most valuable contribution that dWeb can make in the next 5 years. And I'm like so much behind this idea. I'm not working on it. I'm not building anything. But if someone was, I would be super excited to get behind them and help them realize that idea.
I'm more modest. I mean, I would go for uncensorable stack, right? So uncensorable stack like even simple as WordPress deployed. But I would love to see more use cases where the composability of Akash or dWeb, you know, gets into more of the limelight, because one of the beautiful things about Akash is, ephemeral, high performance provisioning and deprovisioning of compute, right, on demand when you want it in a permissionless way. So you can imagine the kind of use cases you can build with such a free-form, frictionless system, right? Um, so as simple as like just building truly open systems, like infrastructure systems, like open containers or open registry, to building systems that scale on demand based on parameters that are user driven, so you can effectively have an autoscaler written on Akash that would schedule a container in a data center that's in close network proximity to, let's say, 95% of your user base, right? So like you should be able to like serve that user base within, I don't know, maybe 10 milliseconds or 50 millisecond latency. Being able to schedule workloads with that level of precision and with that level of freedom is my dream for Akash.
I think ultimately the biggest moonshot is what will attract the most users onto the dWeb stack in the shortest period of time. And when I hear something like decentralized Facebook, I think that will exist on the SHA stack, but I actually don't think that would be the first thing that really starts getting users onto the SHA stack. I think that comes a little bit later. I think the first thing will probably provide new value in a way that doesn't really exist too much today. And I think, an example of an application that's kind of doing this today, even though it's highly controversial, is Big Cloud. Actually, I think is like very interesting because it takes an existing paradigm, right, like Twitter, and then it composes that with the idea of these creator tokens, um, and it's gotten a lot of interest from people. And I don't think the architecture of it is ideal, and I also think that their launch was also not ideal. So I'm not actually super bullish on Big Cloud currently long term, but I think something like this, built correctly, will actually excite a lot of people and bring a lot of people on board. So I'm excited to see something like Big Cloud on the SHA stack. Probably with a few edits, which are a longer conversation. But I think something along those lines would actually get a lot of people on board. And then the moonshot, the great outcome from there is not that application on its own exists, but once that application exists, you'll have a lot of data, a lot of users, all on chain. And the super cool thing is that people can then start building and composing with those users and data. If you think about how social apps work today, right? It's like every social app that you download, they gotta mine your contact book, right? You allow access to your contacts, and they try to rebuild the social graph over and over and over again. And because that's where a lot of the value is. And it's very, very difficult to actually bootstrap those network effects. And so a lot of really cool communities or ideas that might be really interesting and valuable to people at scale will never take off because it's really hard to actually go and build up that momentum and solve that chicken and egg problem. And the amazing thing about an application on the SHA stack is that once those users are on board, now they can go and that data can be leveraged in other applications that provide them value. So I think what you'll end up seeing is that the dWeb ecosystem will first start off providing only incremental value compared to the existing centralized ecosystem, but it'll rapidly iterate in a way that's just not possible at all architecturally in the centralized system. And then it'll advance so much that it will be a no-brainer for people to be using applications And you're kind of starting to see this today in DeFi as well. In DeFi, there's so much more innovation happening than in traditional fintech. And a lot of that has to do with the permissionlessness and the composability. Everything built on in DeFi is basically a Lego that can be used in something else. And that's just not something that happens by default in the traditional fintech stack. You have to build your service very deliberately from the beginning in order to make it composable. And usually those services, you look at like a company like Plaid or Synapse or any of these other fintech services, it's like their entire business is just being a Lego for others. Whereas in DeFi, anything you build can basically be a Lego for others. So I think that's really going to be where a lot of the value comes from.
Yeah, and I would love to see, get to a place where we might be using dWeb technologies without realizing, or dWeb applications without realizing that we are using them. So that's the end goal. So we have multi-chain maximalists. I think you're at the right place. Who are
Just a quick note. Sorry, I have a hard stop, so I need to sign off now. But this is an awesome conversation. So I'm really glad that we had it, and I'd love to have another one.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining. We're going to wrap it up soon, but one last question from multi-chain maximalist here.
Hey, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great. I've been really enjoying listening to this conversation. I'm a huge fan of Akash. Just wanted to mention what we're doing with Stargaze. Stargaze is a decentralized web protocol. We're actually looking into, in many ways, it's very similar to what you've all been talking about. We consider ourselves a non-scammy version of BitClout, and we're doing things like content curation and creation and social tokens. We're also very interested in pursuing the dWeb stack. So I just wanted to shout out and say hi. I was at the gym, but really enjoying the conversation and love the work you all are doing. It's really important stuff.
Yeah, I had a chance to play around with Stargaze, and it's actually really cool. That's how I would imagine a social network to be built, and it's very. That'd be a perfect candidate for Akash, actually. And another point, what Tishan mentioned about composability, and that's really where it's exciting for me, right? Like, for example, once Akash network reaches maturity, that we have enough data centers, on the network, there's no reason for someone to build an app that should just stick to one data center, right? So you should be able to, deploy your workload wherever, whatever network permits you, and probably optimize for one of the parameters, cost being an example, right? So you can imagine like machine learning applications hunting for the cheapest GPU power across a globe, and maybe next to a power provider, next to a power station that's offering low cost power, right? That level of openness, when that level of openness is possible with decentralized technologies, and you can imagine these kind of like composable Lego blocks that could be embedded into other applications to create higher level abstractions, like a simple container deployment system can be abstracted into a machine learning scheduler, right? Like, so the composability is super exciting for me.
Love it. I know we are a little over time. Drew, did you want to say any closing comments?
That's putting me on the spot. I think this was a fantastic discussion. I think one thing to really highlight is part of why I'm so bullish is you've got so many people actually building real live systems, which I think is a huge change from 3 or 4 years ago during the ICO craze where, most things were vaporware. What's exciting about this is, each of these, you can go grab domains on Handshake right now. You can go use SHA to store your data. You can use Skynet to build an application. You can use Akash to power the computing for it. And all of these are live and up and running and growing fast. And I think that's part of why I'm really excited about what the future will hold. It's really hard to predict how all of this composability and power will be used, but it's just a really exciting time in the space.
You wrapped it up better than I could have. Thank you, Drew. So thank you to our speakers today, Greg, David, and Daishin, and thank you everyone for joining. Drew and I are planning to do a lot more of these around dWeb, just concepts, applications, use cases, protocols in the space. So follow us and we will keep you posted. But thank you again for joining everyone. This was a good conversation.
Thank you, Manasi. You're a great host. Really had a good time. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, it was wonderful to be here. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening.